I'm excited to introduce our next guest. We have the senior pastor at Hope Church in Las Vegas, Vance Pitman. Vance, I'd like to welcome you to the Baptist Convention of Iowa annual meeting, and our pastors and other leaders are logging on to see what's going on across Iowa and maybe wondering a little bit why we have a Las Vegas guy. But before we get to that, why don't you introduce yourself and talk about Hope Church and describe it just a little bit for us.
Sure, Tim, and thanks so much for having me today, man. It's really an honor to be able to connect with you and with the BCI and to connect with more of the pastors around the state and what God is doing there. So it's really an honor to be here. I wish we could have had what we originally planned, and I would have actually been there in person.
I know.
But we'll get there. That's going to happen. But no, I'm seriously honored to be able to connect with you today. I've really enjoyed the friendship relationship that I've been able to develop with you over the last several months. And God called me here. Most of your folks can probably tell from my accent, I'm not a native Nevadan. I moved here 20 years ago to be about planting a church. My sending church was the First Baptist Church of Woodstock, Georgia. Our sending pastor, my mentor, Johnny Hunt, had reached out to us and asked us to go to Las Vegas to plant a church. And it was totally off my radar. Like, I had no plans of ever living in Las Vegas. I grew up in Alabama. In Alabama, you don't go to Las Vegas. And if you do, you don't tell anybody. But I genuinely, as soon as Johnny contacted me, God had already done some stuff in my wife and I's heart where we put a yes on the table and said, Lord, whenever, wherever. And we really thought we were headed overseas. But through that conversation with Pastor Johnny, God directed us to Las Vegas. So 20 years ago, we packed up everything we owned, loaded our 3 kids into a car, a minivan, and drove across the country and began the process of engaging the city here, making disciples. And 2 weeks after 9/11, September of 2001, had our first public worship service. We'd made 185 disciples in the city before we had our first public worship service. We launched on a Sunday with 215 people. And now here we are 20 years later and have been about reaching the city. We're very engaged in the city of Las Vegas, been about multiplying the church. Prior to COVID, we were seeing about 3,600 people a weekend in worship. We got about 4,000 people connected in small groups. We've planted 69 churches out of our church in the Western United States. Just launched our 69th, by the way, a church to reach Ethiopians here in the Las Vegas Valley.
Wow.
About 20 of those churches that we've planted have been in Las Vegas. The other 49 have been in the Mountain and Pacific time zones, kind of our Judea and Samaria for us here in Las Vegas. And then we're heavily engaged we have a deep-rooted conviction that when the kingdom of God expands in a city, it means more than more people go to church. It means that the city becomes a better place to live. And so in the arenas of the fight against human trafficking, foster care, criminal justice, racial reconciliation, our church and the educational domain, we're heavily engaged in our city. We're partners with our judicial system. We're partners with the fostering community here in Las Vegas. We're really engaged in seeing holistic community transformation take place. So that's a little bit of our story, our journey. We're engaged in the nations. One of the things that Tim really connected you and I together was this heartbeat for the nations. Now, we believe when God birthed our church, he had the nations on his heart, that it was never just a slice of the pie. Missions is not what we do. The mission is why we were born as a church. So leveraging everything we can for the sake of every tribe, tongue, people, nation is really an important part of our DNA. So that's a little bit about us here in Vegas.
You and I have a mutual friend, Will Mancini, and I've been reading a few of his things, and man, he's bold to bring up you guys as an example of ways to interact and be a blessing in your city. And so it's been fun to read that, and grateful for your work with all of that.
We love Will too. Will actually, we started working with Will Mancini kind of before he was Will Mancini, before Oxano launched as a company, before he did anything with Lifeway. We were early on in the process with him. And so we kind of created we have a little Will salute that we do here at home because he really redeemed Christian consulting for me. I was not a believer in it, but he has such a spirit-led, God-dependent process that he leads you through that, Will was deeply transformational for us here at Hope.
Let me ask you something about 2020. Not only are you in a really difficult spot because of the importance or dependency on the hospitality industry, I understand that you were in the middle of a big building project and you'd already kind of pulled the trigger on that and no going back. Talk about how you navigated through that.
Yeah, three things have made this year extremely challenging. Obviously, for everybody, the pandemic and COVID, and none of us saw this coming. But to be quite honest, COVID, in one sense, for us, has been a little bit refreshing. It's caused us to reevaluate, refocus, to create new systems, new processes, new ways of engaging people. It's strengthened some of our existing processes. It's exposed weaknesses. So COVID, although it's been challenging, it's also been a little bit exciting for those of us with the entrepreneurial wiring, because you just kind of had to restart everything a new way. And for example, this year, we just ran some numbers. 49% of our online audience that's following us weekly is coming from outside the state of Nevada. So we're in like 48 states and like 80 countries around the world where people are leaning in. And so we've just realized this online thing, there's a massive opportunity through technology to make disciples, multiply churches, and trust God for movement. So yeah, COVID's been challenging, but right before COVID hit, we actually did break ground on a $13.5 million facility here in Nevada. Now, that doesn't sound, don't let it sound more elaborate than it is. In Las Vegas, it's so expensive to build. That's not what you think about when you think about the Bible Belt, really. But yeah. Where I'm from originally, but we're in the middle of a building project. And on top of that, the third thing that's made this year incredibly challenging with the political climate and the racial tension in our city and in the country, our church is very multi-ethnic. We have 54 languages represented in our fellowship. So we're a church that's not a majority of anything. It's Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, Polynesian, everything in between. And when you get a multicultural church, that means it's a multi-political church with multi-perspectives. And when you're in the middle of all this political tension, like I have as many MSNBC watchers as I have Fox News watchers in the church, and navigating that. And the difficulty of those three things combined is we've faced challenges in the past, but I feel like in challenges, I've always known what the right thing to do was. And I'm ready for anything as long as I know what's right. I'll take whatever's coming if I know we're doing the right thing. The problem with COVID and the racial tension is I've not always known what's the right thing to do. Do you open or do you close? Right. Do you march or do you not march? Do you say this or do you say that? And I've not known the right thing to do. And for me, in 30 years of pastoral ministry, this has been by far the most challenging year of ministry in 30 years for me. And I say that as somebody who's walked through bankruptcies, economic collapses, moral failures, a ton of stuff that we've experienced here in Vegas, a flood, our building flooded when we opened it our first time. So this has been a tremendously challenging year. So I'm sure some of the folks leaning in and listening today are walking through some of those challenges too and feel the same way. And I just want them to know you're not alone. Yeah, we're all feeling that. And only by the grace of God are we going to get through this.
Yes. And in praying for wisdom, I've listened to your podcast lately, and you've talked about the importance of Proverbs in your life. And I appreciated that podcast. So thank you for that ministry as well. Well, I'd first heard of you, Dr. Johnny Hunt and I worked together in a project when I was overseas 20 years ago. And he told me about this guy who was going to Las Vegas. And that's when I heard your name, and then you took one of the key staff guys with you at that point. And so I was kind of following you from the distance. But let's talk about our reconnection about a year ago when the process was started for Hope Church to affiliate with the Baptist Convention of Iowa. So go ahead, and why don't you start on that and tell that story.
Yeah, it's kind of a crazy story, to be honest. We've been in Nevada here now for 20 years, and we've been a very involved partner with the Nevada Baptist Convention here for, at least 17 years of that history. Up until last year, we were a part of the Nevada Baptist Convention and contributing. Last year, I think, maybe it was not last year because we were in the middle of the transition, but our last full year in the Nevada Baptist Convention, our church gave about 22% of the entire cooperative program budget for the Nevada Baptist Convention. So when I say we were in, we were in.
Yeah.
We were in with our money. We were in with our time. We served on committees. We served at the national level. We planted many churches in the state of Nevada. When you look at the top 15 giving churches to the state of Nevada through the CP, most of them were in the top 15 when I moved here 20 years ago, except for 3 or 4. And those 3 or 4 are all churches that we've planted since we've been here. So not only have we been engaged and involved, we've planted churches that have been engaged and involved. But for us, we believe the kingdom of God runs on the rails of relationships. And relationally, we have just found it increasingly difficult for us to be able to connect, not with necessarily the churches in the state of Nevada. We do a lot of stuff with churches in the state of Nevada and have great relationships. But from our state convention level, we felt more like, I don't know how to say it best, except to say we felt a little bit like we were a plague they were trying to keep others from catching versus a partner that was at the table working with them. For example, we've trained 800 church planters from all over North America and around the world, Mexico, Brazil, Africa. We do a 3-day intensive called M3, where we take everything we've learned in church planting and dump it out. We've trained 800 guys now through that. I've never had anybody from our state convention come be a part of that. I've never had anybody ask about it. I've never had anybody sent through it. It's been a struggle, but we believe in who Southern Baptists are. We believe in the cooperative approach to kingdom expansion. And so we just continued because we thought it was our only option to just give money, but our involvement and our partnership got less and less. And what really was the tipping point for me, Tim, was I have been for 20 years a partner with the North American Mission Board. I was sent out through NAM back in the old days of strategic focus cities. I think we may be one of the last things standing from the strategic focus cities emphasis, but we are. And since then, I've been a partner with NAM. I've done work with NAM. I've now, for the last 7 years, been a national mobilizer with the North American Mission Board. I've spoken in at the highest level of strategy. Been thrilled to watch the Send Network explode. And for example, in my own state, in the state of Nevada, since 2010, we have 190 churches in the state of Nevada. 25% of those churches have been planted since 2010. 25%. Through the partnership with the Send Network, many of those churches we've been involved in planting ourselves, but 25% of the churches have been planted since 2010. And since 2010, in 2019, the last full year of records, 51% of the baptisms in the state of Nevada, if you include Hope Church in with that, even though we were planted before 2010, were church plants plus Hope Church. So 25% of the churches have been planted since 2010. That's 25% of our state's denomination, plus 50% of the baptisms are all new church plants. And yet the North American Mission Board has continued to have incredible struggles in the ability to find partnership. Nevada wanted to do its own thing. They wanted to launch a new network, and they've got all the right to do that, called Plant Nevada. But we were a part of the Send Network. So we began to say, okay, we need to find a kingdom partner that wants to leverage everything they can for the sake of the global eternal redemptive mission, which meant we didn't see 50-50 as the end-all be-all win for the kingdom. We saw it as a starting point. Let's move that needle as far as we can. So we began to pray about what our options were.
And by 50-50, you mean 50% within the state and 50% on the cover.
Exactly. So Nevada, I think, and Iowa, we were two of the first states in the SBC to go 50-50. Nevada did that largely because of mine and a couple of other people in the state, our leadership, and basically said, listen, we're either going this way or we're not going to be a part of this anymore. But a lot of states now celebrate the 50-50 thing like it's the home run touchdown Super Bowl of missions giving, when that ought to be the bare minimum. And we ought to be pushing the needle the other direction so that we're sending and giving at the church level, at the state level, as much as we can to the ends of the earth. And so we got connected to you, Tim, and BCI, because I just heard of your heart. And you and I jumped on a phone call one day, and man, I heard you talk, and I heard the passion of BCI to leverage everything they were for the sake of God's eternal redemptive mission, meaning 50-50 is not the end all be all. It's a starting point, and let's move the needle. Let's continue to leverage our time, our talent, our treasure, our resources for the accomplishment of the Great Commission. And I so resonated with that. And then I found out that as a church, you don't have to live within a state to be a part of that work. And I'm like, who's been keeping that secret? Like, if this word gets out, the BCI is going to have to be pushing people away because it's such an incredible kingdom opportunity to partner for the sake of accomplishing the Great Commission. And so our church and myself personally couldn't be more thrilled about the relationship.
Yeah. So, and we're really grateful, and we're looking forward to having you here for our annual meeting, maybe pastors conference, or maybe something in the spring. We'll keep talking about that. We want to get to know you better and consider ways that we can actually work together, as well as being just affiliated in the same convention. And like I said, we are really thrilled that we are able to raise our cooperative program giving goal or plan budget item to 60% beginning in January. And we're trying to get a little bit higher, but we, the wise people on our executive board said, let's be a little bit more incremental. It's still bold though.
It's really bold. And Tim, I want Iowa Baptists to understand what you're doing is going to shake our denomination, our convention of churches, because it's one thing to go to 50-50 or to 55-45 on a multi-million-dollar cooperative program budget. In the BCI, you're not a multi-million-dollar cooperative program budget. You're a few $100,000 cooperative program budget, which means if you can do it, everybody can do it. It raises the bar. It raises what you're doing. And this is why we wanted to be a part of it, and why I think others are going to want to follow. You are raising the bar for what it means to steward the resources for maximum kingdom effect. And that's so attractive to churches like Hope and to pastors like me.
Yeah, and one of the ways that we've been able to do it, we do not want to be a state convention that just gives all of our funds to the cooperative program. We have important work to do in Iowa. And over the last several years, we've added part-time and full-time staff and expanded our vision and our mission and our ability to accomplish it. And so we're not backtracking on anything for reaching in Iowa. We've been able to expand our staff and our reach. And so we want to do everything that we can to reach the people of Iowa. But then beyond that, we're not trying to get a big foundation with millions of dollars in it. And we want to be part of what God is doing around the country and around the world in mission. And so that's where we want our funds to go. We want to squeeze our expenses and just like everybody kind of did in 2020 is to say, what's really essential here? And then what do we need to do to accomplish the mission? And then what can we do to participate outside of that? And there's one other thing, Vance, that we do that you may or may not be aware of. We've been giving around 15 to 18% of all of our income to agencies in Iowa that are helping the hurting. We pick 10 different categories and pick the best ministry. We can't run them all or staff them all, but we can help support the 10 best ministries across the state in these 10 different areas. So even in the last several years, we haven't been given 50%. We've been given around 65%, and we've been able to retain that. So in our 2021 budget, we're going to 60%, and we're still giving the same amount in 2021 as we gave in 20 to all of these other agencies. So we're just excited how God has blessed us in the generosity and sacrifice of our churches and pastors across the state, and we're thankful for your participation in all of that.
Well, and that's what we want to do. We want to participate. And to be totally honest, I look at this like I do investing. And when you talk about investing, what I'm looking for is the investment financially that's going to provide the greatest return.
Yeah.
And we're talking about investment that's more than money. We're talking about an investment that reaps an eternal kingdom reward. And the stuff that you just described is why we believe the BCI is the best place for us to invest our kingdom dollar, because I think pound for pound, we are getting the greatest kingdom return through our investment through BCI because of its leveraging of resources at the national level and its strategic uses of resources at the local level. It's the best kingdom investment for our SBC dollar for the Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, ends of the earth strategy. And we're grateful to be a part of it. And we don't just want to be a church that, if you will, because I'm from Vegas, launders our money through BCI.
Yeah.
We genuinely want to partner. So we want to, there are things that you're doing in church planting and city engagement that we want to learn from.
Yeah.
And there are things that we're doing in church planting and city engagement that we'd love to reciprocate and teach and share best practices and ideas. We're open to any and all things that partnership could look like, because we believe that the kingdom partnership is really built on that Greek word, and Paul uses it multiple times in Philippians. It's the Greek word koinonia, which most people think means fellowship, which most people think means donuts and coffee. But the word koinonia literally means to share in the life of another.
Yeah.
And so for us to partner together means us sharing in the work of God through the BCI sharing in the work of God through Hope in Las Vegas, and cooperatively and collectively, we're joining in God's mission.
Yeah, well said. And I'm excited about the partnership and want to continue to develop it and figure out how we can leverage the gifting that you have and strengths, and for us to be a resource to you in the ministry. And we are actually working on some other projects in order to provide additional funding for networks of church planting like what you have and others. And we just want to see communities reached with the gospel, and we think the best way to do that is to work together and to start new churches in new neighborhoods. And so we're traveling in the same direction on that, and I want to work arm in arm and seeing more people, not just in Iowa or in the West, but even in North America and around the world that are walking with Jesus because of the faithful service of his people, and they're sharing boldly the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Amen.
So I think that was really valuable, and I think our guys here in Iowa will now have a lot greater understanding of how a church in Las Vegas would, for one thing, not be in the Nevada convention, but for another thing, why skip several and end up in Iowa? And that was a good explanation. So as we end, Vance, if you had just 60 seconds to address the pastors and other leadership across the churches in Iowa as a final message for 2020, what advice or blessing or encouragement would you have?
Yeah, if I was going to close with a final word to the churches and pastors of Iowa, I would say this. First of all, we don't come in as the experts. We come in to partner with you because we realize that you are raising the bar and setting the standard for Southern Baptists for what it looks like to cooperatively accomplish the Great Commission together. So we come in humbly, we come in to learn, we come in to listen, and we come in to be partners in what you're doing. So just know that I know sometimes in smaller state conventions, like I've been a part of for 20 years, like you are in PCI, you can think, we're insignificant, nobody's really paying attention, but you need to know God is raising up BCI, and your testimony is much like that of the churches in Macedonia in the New Testament. The word is spreading, people are hearing, and your kingdom investment and ownership is an example for many. So thank you for your example, and thank you for embracing us and letting us be a part of it.
All right, thank you very much. So hopefully the next time we meet, it can be in person, and it'd be great if you could come to Iowa and share with us, and we could learn from you and you learn from us. And thank you for the time today and for your participation in our annual meeting.
Thanks, Tim.
Yep, thanks.